Palooza 2017. For the past 5 years, come September, October, I receive a message from Lance Wheeler, founder of Baseball Think Tank, asking if I would be willing to speak at his Palooza to be held in December. And like the proverbial fire horse who's been out to pasture for quite a while, but here's the fire bell ring, I come running. And then the next day or two, reality sets in. And I ask myself, why do I do this? Not because I don't want to do it, only because of the work that's involved with putting a presentation together, hopefully one that will have meaning and value to the people who are attending. And it's those people who are attending, that's another reason why I do it, because they appreciate good information from me, and it's a chance for me to renew old acquaintances and relationships. So this year, rolling out the old codger again. 50 plus years of searching for a better way. Selected topics is my presentation. Again, some of you know who I am. Some of you don't have maybe as good an understanding of my background. Technical by training, both in electrical engineering and physics. So why, the question that I would think some of them ask is, well, what am I doing messing around with baseball? It goes back to when I pitched in high school. I wasn't that great, and there was another player on the team. His name was Mike Mins, about 5'5". I was about 6 foot tall, and when he threw the baseball, it went up there like a pissed off cat, hissing all the way. And when I threw a baseball, it didn't do that as much, and I always wondered why. Later on, I went to university on a track and field scholarship because I couldn't throw a baseball that well, but I was still a pretty good athlete, and I spent a lot of time trying to understand training methods. At that time, back in the 60s, the Cold War was being fought on the track and field pitch. I shouldn't say pitch, that's a soccer term, track and field arena. And I spent a lot of time and was introduced to the Russian training techniques, which were one of the more intriguing ones, or part of that information was ballistic overload underload training, which led me back in roughly 96, 97 to start SEPPRO, with a philosophy of developing products based upon my experience and research in training methods, high-level training methods, which included ballistic training, over and underload. As I said, my roots of that go back to the 60s, where I studied the Russian training methods. Instruction goes along with that, specifically how the body actually swings and throws. Again, understanding things, anatomy, physiology, all the good stuff, and in particular motor learning. Movement is created by muscles and connective tissues and skeleton, but it's under control of the nervous system, and the nervous system is what determines movement in terms of goal intent. And last but not least, the body is what we call a dynamic system. Again, this comes from my technical training, and it's subject to chaos, which leads to some interesting things also. SEPPRO developed a number of training systems based upon ballistic overload underload, both for swing and throw. One of the key ingredients is feedback. If you don't know where you're going, any word will get you there, and having feedback is critically important for what you're doing. Some of the ebook publications, information was as critical as the training products. Probably the best known is Rotational Throwing for Numbies, which many and I consider the most complete information on how the body actually throws the baseball. I put this in because one of the speakers at Palooza, just spoke before I did, talked about changing attitudes in Major League Baseball, that outsiders as defined by people who did not come from within the organizations, meaning they didn't have professional experience, are being more accepted. I said back in 2003 I was invited to spring training by Brent Strom, who you see on the right side. He is now pitching coach for the Houston Astros. Did a great job this year. Got them through a World Championship. Anyway, one day toward the end of my stay there, I was talking to a pitcher came up to me and said, "Mr. Nyman, I'm on the bubble. They're going to make cuts tomorrow. I've got one last shot. Can you have any information? I'm going to be throwing today, pitching today." I gave him some, hopefully, words of wisdom. Later on that afternoon, he came back and he was he's all smiles. He said, "Mr. Nyman, I was able to do some of the stuff you told me, and I had a very good outing." Come the next day, Brent comes up to me and says, "Paul, I don't want you talking to players anymore." And I said, "What do you mean, Brent?" He said, "Well, my player development, director of player development came to me and said that he didn't want you talking to players." Anyway, let's hope that Major League Baseball is changing a little bit. SEPRO notables. Some of the things that I think SEPRO has pioneered or is hopefully some legacy. Probably number one is intent. Everything we do is driven by goals, and how effectively we do those or how much effort we put into it is driven by intent. Intent to throw the baseball as opposed to pitching the baseball. The inverted W, and in the immortal words of Sir Winston Churchill, never have so many said so much who knew so little about the inverted W. The inverted W has been used as a whipping boy by those who want to show how much they know and in reality show how little they know. Scap loading, pelvic loading, those are pretty, much less controversial, and actually much more easier to in some ways demonstrate the effectiveness of scap loading and pelvic loading. Backward chaining, that comes right out of motor learning, and what's somewhat unique about what I've done is applied it to throwing the baseball. And overload underload training with feedback. That's been one of the foundations of SEPRO. This is my fifth palooza, as I said. Always a dilemma of sorts. What do I present? How do I present it? What are people going to be interested in? How can I make their trip here worthwhile? So for this palooza, I focused on how does the body efficiently throw the baseball. I've always been a stickler for definitions. Definition of efficiency, the ratio of useful work performed by machine or in process to the total energy expended or heat taken in. Simply stated, how effective for what you put in, how much did you get out, and the difference between what you put in and what you put out, the ratio is efficiency. My definition of throwing efficiency, again, throwing efficiency is not a sabermetrics. I'm not talking about sabermetrics in terms of walks, hits, allowed, replacement value, so on and so forth. I'm talking about body. So my definition of throwing efficiency, those body movements that are repeatable, create maximum speed with precise location, and terrific movement with minimal efforts. Another definition that I found might be a little bit more, give a little more illumination to what I'm going to talk about. Efficiency of movement. Technically, it relates to energy expenditure. The less energy expended during execution of a sports skill, the more efficient is its movement. And this comes from Dr. Yeastis' Sports Lab. If we're talking about efficiency, we're talking, from my perspective, two things. We're talking about energy expended to throw, and we're talking about momentum. How much of momentum are we getting into the baseball? And energy, I think people have a reasonable feel for. Momentum seems to be a lot less understood in terms of specifically how it affects throwing the baseball. So what I like to do is have some fun with numbers. Let's hypothetically say that we have Justin Verlander, who's 6'4", 200 plus pounds. And let's just talk about Verlander going from over the rubber, starting his windup, and going into foot plant. During that process, his body, his center of mass, we'll talk about, will reach its maximum velocity going toward home plate. And now we're only going to talk about him moving his body mass, from a stationary position into foot plant. Now during that process, his center of mass will travel approximately 3 feet. Again, think of the center of the hips, center of the belly button. And from the video, measures about a third of a second. In other words, from a stationary position through movement into foot plants, about a third of a second. That means he reaches a peak velocity, or an average velocity, I should say, about 6 miles per hour. The energy that he generates is equal to mv squared over 2. The energy for him, 200 pounds, going 9 feet per second, is 253 joules. Joules is the unit measurement of energy. Now, let's assume, it's a big assumption, that we can apply all of that energy directly to the baseball and make it go. And we can do that by setting 253 equal to mv squared. We know the mass of the baseball, we don't know the velocity, but we can solve for it. One unknown, one equation. Turns out the velocity of that baseball, if we could apply that energy, would be 154 miles per hour. That's pretty good. That is an efficiency of 65%. Now, in reality, in real measurements, that's not anywhere near the efficiency. The efficiency is much less. But again, we're only talking about the energy that he's developing going into foot plant. Let's talk about momentum. Momentum is equal to mass times velocity. Same numbers. Velocity 9 feet per second. Mass is same mass. Mass is calculated by taking weight, dividing it by the acceleration of gravity, 200 divided by 32. That comes out to be 56 pound-feet per second. Now, momentum doesn't have a nice, is not a nicely unit that's named after some scientist. Maybe someday there will be. But the units of momentum are purely from the mathematics of the calculation. Pound-feet per second. Momentum of 56 pound-feet per second. If we equate it to the baseball, we're going to put all the momentum into baseball. Well, lo and behold, that baseball would travel at a speed of 3,909 miles per hour. To be continued.